So this could be my review for Highlander, The Final Dimension. This came out in 1994. It's also known by original title, I guess, was Highlander 3, The Sorcerer. And the reason I watched this is because I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of movie podcasts, and one of them, We Hate Movies. It's like a bunch of New York comedians, and they watch movies and make fun of them and comment on them and review them. It's really funny podcast, and they were going to watch this. And I'm a decent fan of the Highlander series, and so I'd seen, I don't know, most of them. I can't remember if I've seen the second one or not, but I know I've seen some of the later ones, the original, of course, and I've seen some of the episodes of the show. It's an interesting concept and whatnot, so I was like, I'll give it a try. So if you don't know, the original Highlander is pretty good. It's basically supposed to be a one-off movie, and then they made a second one, Highlander 2: The Quickening, but that one turned like all of the Immortals into like aliens, and people just hated it. That one's supposed to be really bad. I don't think I've seen that one all the way through. But then this came out and pretty much just ignored the second one altogether. I think the second one actually is supposed to take place in the future. So this one is basically a sequel to the original, the first Highlander movie. And it's kind of interesting what they do to make it a sequel a little bit, but I'll get into that. So we have Christopher Lambert is back. It's Connor McLeod, or Russell Nash is this kind of his code name that he goes by in modern New York. And Mario Van Peebles plays the main bad guy here, Kane. Mario Van Peebles is kind of an interesting actor. I've always kind of known of him, but I was just looking through his like IMDb page, his list of films, and I don't really know why I was so aware of him. Yeah, I think he's a pretty decent name in the movie industry in the 90s. He was in like New Jack City. He directed and starred in a couple movies. One was like called Posse. It's kind of like Young Guns with like mostly black actors. Then he's in a movie called Panther. It's about like the Black Panthers that he wrote and directed and was in as well. I think another big thing is that his dad is Melvin Van Peebles, and I think he's a really big name in like blaxploitation films in the 70s. And then Mario Van Peebles actually played his father, in a movie called Badass. I think they're kind of like a pretty well known family in the film industry. So I was kind of always aware of him. But so he's in this as the bad guy. And we also have Deborah Kara Unger, one of her earlier roles. She plays a anthropologist, archaeologist, who kind of discovers some of the immortal Highlander, Connor McLeod stuff and gets involved. So basically, this is pretty much just a straight it's not a remake of the original, but it follows the beats almost exactly. Connor has like an adopted son at the beginning of this, but then we don't really see him again until the end. He kind of comes into play, but I don't even know if I want to get into the whole story. Kane is like a really badass immortal that the way they get this sequel to happen is because Connor McLeod was supposed to like win the prize in the first one. And if you win the prize, you kill all the other mortals. And that's what he thought had happened. But here, the only way you get a sequel with more immortals, apparently this Kane was trapped in under a mountain, and then he gets unearthed like in hundreds of years later, 400 years later, and then he's gonna fight Connor. So yeah. I don't know. I don't even want to get into the plot of this movie. It's just I really didn't like it. But yeah, it's basically all there is. So Connor has to come out of living the good life with his son, has to fight Kane. Kane had like killed one of his masters, a Japanese man named Nakano, and so Connor kind of has to like go fight him and re-win the prize, I guess. And that's basically all it is. Kane's trying to find Connor, and they're going to fight each other. And then Deborah Kara Unger's character is in there kind of figuring things out. It's very, very similar to the first one. Kane is pretty much just like revamp of Kurgan from the first movie, and I can't remember who played the actress in the first movie, but Deborah Kara Unger is basically a facsimile of her too, so not very different from the first one. There's some really funny like trapeze fighting. There's like a random trampoline in this room, and they're jumping on it and swinging around and fighting, and I thought that was super dorky and funny. There's a hilarious montage. Connor's sword gets broken, and he has to go to Scotland to reforge it. And there's just like so many shots of like flowing water, and he's trying to make this sword, and eventually Deborah Unger's character has to come, and she has like a billet of steel for him to use, and he's like trying to train in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's so funny. The music's really bad in this movie. Especially at the end, they have a instrumental version of Dr. Feelgood. And it's pretty obvious right away. It's like, what is that? It's super 80s sounding, but there's no lyrics. The lyrics don't kick in. But eventually I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is Dr. Feelgood. It's a weird choice. Everything else has kind of been very moody, slow music, like you'd hear at like a Starbucks or a Barnes & Noble or something. So yeah, the music's really awful in this. It's so bad that it stuck out. Usually if music's really good, you notice it. If it's really bad, you notice it. If it's just so-so, it just kind of goes by the wayside, but pretty bad here. And then, like I said, Kane is basically just a retelling of like what the Kurgan was from the first one. There's a very similar like car scene that happened in the first one, and it's like over the top. And so with Connor's son is used as bait a little bit, and so yeah, it was pretty boring. I didn't like it. I don't think it was worth the watch. I kind of like to watch the movies before I listen to that podcast, We Hate Movies, just so I can kind of follow along, but I don't think this one was worth it. I think the first movie, it wasn't supposed to have a sequel. It was never meant to start this whole series, and it should have just stayed a one-off. The first one's not any amazing masterpiece itself, but it is unique and interesting. It kind of has this... I think people try to make so many sequels and the TV shows because it has a very fascinating mythology to it about these immortals, and they have this kind of game going on where they chop each other's heads off, and it's really interesting, and I think people are just fascinated by it and they just want to keep retelling it, but nobody's done it in a good way ever since the first one was like the best attempt at it, and probably should have just stayed that way. It just keeps getting worse and worse with the sequels. So yeah, I can't, not a recommend. I don't think you need to go check out the third Highlander for any reason. But apparently the second one's really bad too. I don't even want to watch that one. But if anything, just go watch the first one and be done with it. It's an okay 80s movie. It also has a great soundtrack. I mean, that is a huge thing that has it going for it. The score and the soundtrack is by Queen. They made the whole thing, original music for it. So that's pretty amazing, because Queen's an awesome band. So I recommend Highlander, the original one. I do not recommend the third Highlander, The Final Dimension. I'm giving it like a 1.5 out of 5. Very low, not recommend. So, alright, that'll be it.